As a podcaster, everything I watch on TV, I'm always kind of going, how does this apply to podcasting? And even though I'm not a 15-year-old girl, I watched the Billie Eilish documentary on Apple TV. It's called The World's a Little Blurry. And I kind of wanted to see what I could learn from somebody who is having massive success. And if you're like, I've never heard of her, it's probably because you're not a 15-year-old girl. But I wanted to understand why. And number one, she's a pretty smart cookie. She's 19. And she has the fashion sense to more or less dress up like SpongeBob. Like she looks like a giant square. And if you think about it, if you were a 19-year-old female pop singer, you know you're going under the microscope. And I thought that was pretty cool. You also see where she kind of looks a little bit like she's a control freak, but she knows what she wants to do. She knows her mission, even though her record label's like, we need a hit. And her lyrics are insanely vulnerable, which helps to connect with her audience. And she has a very unique voice. It's kind of this jazzy, whispery thing. The fun thing is she records her albums with her brother in a bedroom. So here again, it's not the tech. So if you hear her music, it was recorded in a bedroom. And in the documentary, you see while she might get tired of doing press, she always takes time to greet her fans. You also get to see the impact her music has on people. This has led to her having 44 million followers on Spotify, 81 million followers on Instagram. In 2020, she earned not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but 6 Grammys. The documentary, she was paid $25 million for that from Apple, and her net worth is reportedly at $53 million. And that's not too bad for two people having fun recording things in their bedroom. Speaking of two people recording things from their house, today we're going to hear how a husband and wife team are recording podcasts about dog sitting, and wait till you hear the impact they are having on their audience. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I'm your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson. Thanking you so much for tuning in. I just rolled over 16 years now in podcasting. That's back when I started the School of Podcasting, which you can find at schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code LISTENER when you sign up to save 20% on either a monthly or yearly subscription. And before we get to our chat with Collin Funkmeister, and if you're like, hey, Dave, what the guy, no, his real name is Funkmeister. That's not me like coming up with a cool, fun name for him. I need to remind you that the question of the month is coming up. I need your answers by April 23rd, 2021. The question of the month is, and this is for people who have a co-host, how did you go about finding or choosing your co-host? I'd love to hear about this. Go over to schoolofpodcasting.com/question. And while you're there, be sure to tell us the name of your show, where we can find it, and a little bit about it. And then, of course, how did you go about finding and choosing your co-host? And again, I need those by April 23rd, 2021. Just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question. I met Collin, who does the Pet Sitter Confessional podcast. You can find it at petsitterconfessional.com. On Saturday morning, I do a live call-in show called Ask the Podcast Coach. And when I heard about his show about pet sitting that he does with his lovely wife, Megan, I was like, I bet there's a story here. And there was. Here's my talk with Collin. Collin, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
What inspired you to start a podcast for pet sitters?
So my wife and I have been pet sitting for almost 9 years, a little over 9 years at this point, actually. And about 3 years ago at this point, we sat down and just wanted to do something different, wanted to do something creative together. We don't really figure that we're a creative bunch of people. And I've always listened to podcasts. My wife was like, well, why don't we do that? You like that? That's something interesting. What could we do? And we were like, well, what are we? How do we define ourselves? What could we speak from with interest and authority and tell funny stories? And we're like, oh, why don't we talk about being a pet sitter, the life of a pet sitter? So our podcast is Pet Sitter Confessional by pet sitters for pet sitters, where we tell funny stories and experiences and things we've learned.
What are some of the things you've previously talked about on your show.
Recently, we talked about the importance of educating your clients on not just your services and why they're needed, but also helping them to be better pet parents and why that helps you stand out of the crowd. We do interviews with other pet sitters. So we bring pet sitters from across the globe to come in and we interview them just about their story. So we start at the very beginning. Why did you start being a pet sitter? And what would you want to tell somebody that's just starting out today? So we've had a little over almost 80 guests on at this point, and from all across the globe. And it's been really interesting.
And Collin and Megan know exactly who their audience is.
We are constantly having to disambiguate ourselves, but that we are not for pet owners. You know, pet owners can listen and they can get a little peek behind the curtain about what their pet sitter goes through, or listen to a show and figure out what a good pet sitter should do. But we're really targeted pet business owners who are walking dogs, and maybe they're solopreneurs, or maybe they have a small team around them.
So he's doing pet sitting, and not just pet sitting, dog pet sitting. So he niched down on that. And by having that super focused niche, it enabled him to get a sponsor.
And so we kind of early on, my wife and I sat down and we were like, okay, we're business owners. We're business owners. Who would we want to work with? And we made a big list and we sat down and we actually just emailed those people and said, look, here's who our audience is. Here's our method. And here's the why of why we're doing this podcast: to grow community, get connected, and tell stories. And we got an awesome response. And so we actually have a pet software company who actually manages pet bookings, payment processing, those kind of things, the back end work for a business. I got them on the phone and they were like, absolutely, we want to work with you. You're talking to the people that we want to talk with.
Right.
And then we actually just recently brought on this company who their only thing is they have a product where if a client's pet dies, the pet business owner can go online, order flowers, order some pretty decorations, and have them sent to them as part of the grieving process, as a gift, as a memorial of them. Mm-hmm. And she actually reached out to us and said, hey, I found your podcast. We want to work with you guys because, again, you're talking to the people who we want to get connected with. How
did you, and I'm not trying to get in your wallet, how did you figure out how to price stuff?
It was really hard because we're still new to podcasting, and in all of the forums, they're like, oh, it's $10 per 1,000 listeners or whatever the CPMs rate. And we knew very early on that we were very niche and we were never going to get 20,000 listeners every single week because it's just not, there's a cap on the number.
It's pet sitters.
Sitters. There's a cap on the number of pet sitters, and there's going to be a cap on the number of pet sitters who also listen to podcasts. And so we knew that going in, and we were fine with that. So basically we just sat down, we were like, look, what are magazines charging? What are these other ad rates going out there? It was kind of scary, just being honest, about charging these higher rates for these products, or for these ad spots, because it was like, who am I to charge that? I don't know what's going on. But we had the listenership, and we had these dedicated people who were following us and just loved and ate up everything we put out there. And we could take that to these sponsors and go, this is what we're bringing to the table. And they absolutely love it. They love the targeted that it is, and that it's coming from us too.
Well, and the other thing you brought up, the one is, I'm assuming, is it a monthly subscription to the kind of back end software? Or is there something you buy once?
Yeah, it's a monthly subscription that they pay for.
So, and do you know what people pay for that?
So they pay $50 a month if you're just by yourself. And then for each person that you add on for your team, it's an additional charge on top of that.
Got it. So think about this. This is where people go, well, I don't know what I should charge. You got to remember the lifespan of a customer. So if they get one person from your particular show and that person walks dogs, you've been doing this for how long? You said 8 years?
9 years.
9 years? 9 years. So that's a lot of months. I'm not going to do math. It's a lot of months times 50. That's where you got to start to think about, not just the fact that they're going to pay for this month, but how much money is that customer going to bring in? And that's where you kind of go, oh, I need to raise my price. Hold on a second.
Well, and two, they're host read. So either my wife or myself will read them on the show. They're baked in. They're not dynamic. They're there for as long as the show's there. And that's another selling point for these really targeted ads that people are not targeted ads, but these for this targeted market, especially when you're doing on a smaller scale, because you look at the built up value that we've had a sponsor now for almost 2 years. We're going on 2 years here in a couple months and they've been with us for that long. And it's all of those shows that person has now. that they're in and they're locked in. And the number of repeat listeners or the number of people who go through our entire back catalog is actually a lot.
Well, because you can't get information about pet sitting. You know what I mean? It's not like there's thousands of blogs out there on the subject. That's what's great about it.
Right.
And so many people think if I could just get this big name person on my podcast that my numbers would just go through the roof. And I've always said it's not the size of the guest that brings the value. It's the size of the value that makes the guest.
The people that we are interviewing are actually directly in our target audience. So we're bringing pet sitters to talk to other pet sitters. So the podcast itself is people talking to other listeners of the show. And we're pretty open about people who we bring on. We don't really select. I know a lot of people try and select based off of audience size or who their reach is so they can promote the show, right? And they're always interested in, well, this person has 20,000 followers and this person has 2, so I'll take the 20,000 followers. They're still a listener of our show, so I want them on the show. And we have gotten some of the best conversations from people who have 1 follower or 2 followers versus somebody who's had 20 or 30. And we never see any bumps from people who have the higher followers.
And you remember me talking about the impact that they're having on their audience? Check this out.
Just recently, a lady posted on Instagram where she sat down and she recorded herself listening to every single one of our episodes and then edited it together. We have 161 episodes that we've produced, and she listened to the entire back catalog over the course of 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks. And at the end, she gave a very heartfelt what the show meant to her, how much she learned, how much she had grown, and just that she felt more connected to people. And my wife and I sat there and we cried, right? We were like, what? Like, what is going on? Like, this means so much that somebody would take that time. And I think part of that is, as pet sitters, you spend really long days away from everybody and not talking to people. You tend to talk to pets. They can't really talk back. And so if they do, let me know and we'll bring you on the show. But to have our voices and other pet sitters' voices in their ears while they're doing pet sitting, saying, it's going to be okay. I know it's hard. We can get through this. Here's some strategies to grow your business. Here's what we're experiencing. We're right in the trenches with you. Like, it really just kind of feels like everyone's giving each other a big hug. And I know it sounds really sappy, but especially through last year, like, that's what everybody needed. And we felt this big connection and this huge click that just happened when we were just telling stories.
When you can make somebody who feels alone not feel alone. I mean, I know we talk about CPMs and all this other stuff. I'm like, to me, that is priceless. How many episodes did this woman listen to?
She went through 162. We just released another one. Yeah. So 162 episodes. And and she had filled 3 composition books full of notes, annotations, and comments that she wanted to implement in her business and things that she had learned through that audio. So this lady listened to 115 hours of audio.
And if someone is taking notes from your podcast, you are delivering value. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably like, oh, let me guess. These guys have a background in media. They've been on the radio for 15 years, something like that, right?
My wife and I are not coaches. We're not selling things on the podcast that go back to us. We don't have a business around the podcast. The podcast is itself. And to know that somebody looked at that and said, this has value and this is what I want. And that kind of connection is, as you said, totally priceless. And almost we didn't know what to do with that because it was just so huge of an act by this listener. And we get feedback from people all the time of going, I never knew somebody was going through this. I never knew other people were experiencing this. And it's pet sitting, right? You think, how hard can it be? Or, but it does feel lonely. And that's what we're kind of feeling like we're tapping into and growing with other people as well. Like, we tell them, we don't have all the answers, but we will help you find them. And we will bring people on who can talk about that. And we want to be that resource, and we want to be that voice and lift up other voices too.
So what are things are you doing to build your community?
So we do have a Facebook page that we interact with a lot. We are posting unique questions in there, and we are interacting on those posts, and that's been a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed giving some prompts to interact with people, but after almost 2 years now, people are asking their own questions, and that's really gratifying to see when people start using that as a forum to bring up their questions, bring up their things that they are experiencing. We do Instagram lives every now and then. And then one of the things that we also do is we have a weekly kind of wrap up email that we send out every Friday. And we really started that in the middle of the pandemic because we started out doing once a week. And then when the pandemic hit, we started doing 3 to 4 shows a week. And it was just so much because we were trying to keep everybody up to date about how the pet sitting world was changing and things that they should be expect and pulling in interviews and people and these resources and giving it to our listeners. And a weekly wrap-up email has actually been a huge hit because some people can't hit every episode. Some people don't get all the links. And it's a great way to just get that information in front of them again so that they can experience that.
I'm going to make your next renewment of your sponsor super easy. This tip comes courtesy of Mark from Beyond Bourbon Street. Ask your sponsor if they would like to be in your Facebook group. Because what's great about this is, again, they're now intermingling and just say, look, don't spam the crap out of the Facebook group. We're already promoting you. But what's great is what Mark did is he had a sponsor. And then when it came time to renew the advertising, he's like, in his case, it was, the name of the company was Two Chicks Walking. It was a walking tour because he's in New Orleans. And he said, hey, how many people have gone a walking tour with the 2 chicks? A bazillion hands went up. So it's kind of nice to kind of go, hey, look, your advertising is working. So that might be something. It's a great strategy to try. And plus, in theory, I would think they'd want to be in there because now they're seeing exactly, they might come up with some features to add to the software that they didn't know because, it's a chance for them to get to know their audience better, and everybody wins in that scenario. You're getting paid, they're getting information, they're getting customers, your customer's getting a great product. So I also saw where you're starting a Patreon, or you have a Patreon page. How is that working?
It's growing. It's still in its infancy stage, and that was a big struggle for Megan and myself when we were trying to figure out how to structure that because I see a lot of Patreons out there that are throwing out buttons and T-shirts and gadgets and gizmos and all sorts of stuff and all these extras. And we took a big step back and we said, what we really want is we want to be able to pour everything we can into the podcast. And I don't really want to get distracted with making extra videos or this extra content when and let the podcast falter because, both my wife and I do work full-time jobs. We all are pet sitters. We're up at all hours of the day with 2 kids. So we're really looking at our time and going, how can we best value this and make it still worthwhile? So we have 2 tiers. The lower tier is basically they get extra good feelings for supporting their favorite show. They get access to a private community, and that's it. And then the step above that is they get all those, plus they get unedited, extra long interviews to early access. Because I'm already doing the interview, I'm already sitting down with somebody. I can not edit it out, as intensely as I typically do, and they get that at a little bit earlier than they normally would.
That tip you just heard is from my book, Profit from Your Podcast, Proven Strategies to Turn Listeners into a Livelihood. You can find that book at profitfromyourpodcast.com. Now, if you don't have a podcast, it's time to join the School of Podcasting, where we make sure you sound professional, confident, and engaging. You're never going to buy equipment you won't need. You'll gain access to step-by-step tutorials, live group coaching, priority email support, and a private Facebook group filled with brilliant podcasting minds. All there to help you plan, launch, and grow your podcast. Check it out over at schoolofpodcasting.com/join and use the coupon code LISTENER when you sign up. And it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. schoolofpodcasting.com/join. Now back to Collin. Did you think anybody would listen to this when you started it?
No, genuinely no. We looked at where the space was. We kind of looked at who the biggest players were in pet sitting and some of the organizations and the people who had the largest followers and tried to figure out where we would fit in this. And we were like, that huge imposter syndrome of who was my wife and I to talk about this? We're literally nobody. Nobody knows us. We're starting from zero. The likelihood that the word's going to get out is basically none, but we're still going to do this because we want to try it. And flash forward 2 years, and I'll give all credit to my wife. She is social media guru, for us. The amount of work that she puts in, that how she's grown that has been amazing. And now we've got all these followers and these people listening to us and looking to us. It's immense, right? It's really humbling to think that who are we again? And we still think about that, because we tell our listeners we're nobody. We got a review from somebody that was like, these people are nobody. They're not coaches, blah, blah, blah. And my wife and I were kind of like, yeah, that's the point. That's the whole point of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't, we're just sharing. And so, a couple points of advice would be, it's okay to start from zero. Everybody does. That's okay. And to put it in a lot of context and looking at numbers and figuring this stuff out, is like, if you had that number of people, I know a lot of people say this, but if you had that number of people in a room listening to you talk every single week, would you be excited? And that hits home every now and then when my wife and I look at our numbers that we get every week, and then we'll see one of the largest pet sitters associations out there. They'll do a Facebook Live or they'll do a full online conference. And we are doing double or triple or quadruple the numbers that they're pulling in on that. And we just, again, you take a big step back. But just starting and figuring out what your voice is really huge. Don't get to step 2 of who's my listener or what's all this or what equipment do I buy. I look at who you are and what you want to share. And that alone, being genuine and coming from that standpoint, really, really, you can't put a price on that, and people will immediately connect and they'll see that. I had one lady who commented and she said, I can tell you're smiling when you talk. And and I had to take a step back and I recorded the next time we did. And I was like, I do smile all the time. And people pick up on that. People pick up on those little things that you have no idea that you do, but it's those little things that people love. And to not be afraid of that, putting yourself behind the microphone, you have to embrace yourself and be okay with that. And that's huge. That's really huge.
You've kind of been saying, like, who am I? So if you don't mind sharing, like, can we share what your day jobs are?
Sure. So I'm actually a biologist by trade. I was
going to guess that.
Okay.
I was like, I bet he's you know what? He seems like a nice guy. He looks like a biologist. Now go ahead. So
I've got some preserved squid and fish behind me if you want one.
Nice.
So I'm a biologist by trade and by training and experience. And my wife has a master's in environmental toxicology. And she works from home now doing taxes, and she helps with CPAs and all this stuff too. And so that's where we're coming from. And we've been pet sitting for 9 years on top of that and running that business. And so
no radio training, no media, just a biologist and a
right. Like we have no experience in social media marketing, in running this kind of business, in producing and editing. Zero experience, just avid podcast fan, listen to all sorts of ones, and wanted to start telling some stories. And that's genuinely where that started. And so stories is where it's at.
That's it. You both have full-time jobs. You have 2 children and you pet sit. How do you find time to podcast?
Scheduling. Most of the time when my wife and I, like, we live and die by our calendar, it's an absolute mess and mayhem, and anybody who looks at it would probably need to sit down and faint for a little bit. But we really try, and throughout the week, work on show notes, work on topics little by little every single day. And we're constantly sharing back in a Google Doc and reviewing them just a little bit, right? Taking these little bites, not eating the elephant all at once. And that's really what we have to do with that. For the interviews, I really enjoy the interviews, and I try and schedule those out way in advance and just stack them up so that if someone cancels or something changes, there's plenty of time to plan and nobody gets freaked out about it. I'm currently working with a lady to try and get her interviewed, and we've had to move it like 7 times, and it's fine. But it's this time on this buffer and building buffer in our lives and not scheduling things back to back so you don't feel compressed, so that when you have time to relax and you have time to take in, you have time to process, giving ourselves that time and giving ourselves permission to have that time, because you always feel like you could be doing more, especially as hobby podcasters. I feel like we could do one more thing. I could post one more thing. I could do this one more thing. And just knowing We're going to post when we can. We're going to work out a schedule. We're going to stick to the schedule. And then that's all we're going to do. And that's fine, right? And that way there's more of us at the end of the day. And there's more of us for our listeners too, right? They don't want us to show up on a Sunday after night at 9 p.m. at night to record. And both her and I are just like, and just not be there. We have to give ourselves space.
That's it.
And now it's time for a last 5 and 5. What were the last 5 podcasts you listened to?
I'm going to throw a pop quiz at you because you just said you listen to podcasts. And if you want to grab your phone, it's allowed. What are your favorite podcasts? If you can remember, what were the last 5 podcasts you listened to?
Oh,
and
man.
if you can tell me a little bit about them.
Okay, sure. I'm actually listening to Creating Great Grooming Dogs. Okay. She comes on and she's a groomer. In this one, she talks about anthropomorphizing dogs and how not to read human body language or human emotion into the dogs that you're working with. Really, really interesting. Was listening to Back to Work with Merlin Mann and Dan Benjamin. They talk a little bit about productivity hacks, but it's a lot about like work-life balance. I've been listening to that one for forever. I listen to The Talk Show with John Gruber. So it's a tech podcast that comes out, and they talk mostly about Apple, but kind of the state of things in the tech world. And I listened to The Feed this morning.
Oh, there you go.
So
it's a good one.
Yeah. Yesterday I got caught up on The Flophouse.
This is why I asked this question. I've never heard of The Flophouse. What is that about?
It's a movie review podcast. It's with Elliot Kalin, Dan McCoy, and Stuart Wellington. They watch a bad movie and they talk about it. And it's kind of a comedy podcast, right? And they kind of review these cheesy movies and these ones that just aren't really good, but do it in a funny, kind of lighthearted way.
Well, the website again, petsitterconfessional.com. Collin, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a blast, and you will probably make it into a few of my slides in the future when people talk about like, what are some niche podcasts? I'm like, well, chameleon breeding, pet sitting, it's like you'll definitely be making it in there. So I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, there is so much chocolatey goodness in that interview. I love the fact that when he was thinking about looking for sponsors, he was like, hey, who would we actually want to work with? Like, not just like get their money, but who would we want to work with? I love that. I love the fact that he said some of his best guests are just, for lack of a better phrase, normal people. They're not people with 81 million Instagram followers. They're actually taking notes because his podcast is delivering so much value. We actually talked after we stopped, and I said, you ought to look into creating a course maybe, because he's got all this information and he's already got 2 streams of income. And that's the other thing. They didn't start this to make money. They started because they thought it would be fun and they wanted to do something together as a couple, and let's do something creative. And I'm here to tell you, Collin, keep Megan. Any wife that says, hey, honey, why don't you start a podcast? That's a keeper in my book right there. That's the way I do that. So the last thing I want to mention that I thought was really important there was he mentioned about keeping a buffer. And there are times when I have taken on too many things. Now, people always say, Dave, you have like how many? 5, 6 podcasts? I have a lot of podcasts, but I also have no wife and no kids. So that's, again, enables me to do that. But I am, even with that, I'm looking to scale back on some of my non-podcast about podcasting podcasts. Say that 3 times fast. And just get a little buffer. You want to have enough space in your life so that when things go like, I don't know, you're having somebody installing air conditioning, or you just bought a shed for your backyard and you're trying to figure out, when am I going to put that thing together? You need a little buffer in your life. And it also helps you maintain your sanity. I don't know about you, but there are just times when your brain is just like, ugh, and you need a little buffer. And here where I am in Ohio in April, it's now spring. It's very nice outside, and I want to go outside, and I've been doing that. And having that time to kind of just go, a lot of people call it meditation, whatever you want to call it. You do need some downtime because your body just can't be up all the time. Probably a couple weeks ago, I binged watched The Walking Dead, the latest season. And after like 4 episodes of that, it just dawned on me, my entire body was tense because I was just waiting for some zombie to come out and eat my face. And we need some downtime. So keep that in mind. And I know a lot of people ask sometimes, well, Dave, you're the guy that hasn't missed a Monday in forever. Well, yeah, that's true. But I did take a break on one of my shows, and I've just never taken a break on this show now in 16 years. And if I did, I would tell you, hey, next week I'm taking a week off because I need to build a shed in my backyard and I need the time. And you would probably say, hey, you go have fun with your shed because I guess you like me because you're 30 minutes into this podcast and you haven't tuned out yet. So keep that in mind. Your audience wants you to win. Your audience wants you to be well, because if you're not well, then you're not going to make a good podcast. So keep some buffer in your life. I know I often joke that podcasts are a lot like potato chips. It's hard to have just one. But if I could take a time machine back 16 years to myself, I'd say, hey, Dave, just stop with one. Make one really, really good podcast that inspires people to tell their friends instead of starting however many I've started over the years. So keep that in mind, which is weird from the guy that's like, hey, let me teach you how to podcast. I'm saying, maybe you shouldn't podcast. Keep that in mind. You need three things to have a successful podcast. And none of this has to do with technology, microphones. You need your health, because otherwise, well, that's not going to work. You need support from your family, your friends, whatever that is. And you need your attitude, because if you don't have your attitude, well, that's going to ruin your health, and you're not going to be good on your microphone. If you don't have support from your friends and family and they're constantly nagging you because you're always in your studio, yeah, that's going to kind of kill your attitude. And then if you're like, okay, fine, I'll just podcast at 4 a.m, that's going to kill your health. I've done an episode on that in the past. But thank you so much for tuning in. And speaking of having a buffer in your life, if you want to hand off the editing to somebody else, check out schoolofpodcasting.com/edit. That's a team I just assembled to create affordable podcast hosting. Check that out, schoolofpodcasting.com/edit. Don't forget about the question of the month, especially if you have a co-host, schoolofpodcasting.com/question. It's really all out at the website, schoolofpodcasting.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next week, join me on my mission to rid the world of boring podcasts. Take care. Class is dismissed.
If you like what you hear, then go tell somebody. If you like what you hear, then go tell somebody.
What's her official title? I was going to say accountant, but I heard taxes in there.
Accountant is fine. Yeah, so accountant. Yeah, so
okay.
Yeah,
I don't want to say something else like, how dare you, accountant? Oh.
No, we're not big on titles. No,
my episodes don't sound like that when I don't use crap. See, now that I turned my blooper into a blooper. Take 2 on this one. I didn't use Squadcast on this episode. I recorded this probably about a month ago, and I forget why we didn't use Squadcast, but if you go back and listen, there are times when Zoom was just kind of cutting out for no apparent reason, and that's why I like to use Squadcast.